Hey y'all, I haven't read Harry Potter in a while, but I'm gonna start again. So, I started from 225 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, right where I left off. Um, so here you go. I'm in chapter 13, and it's called Nicholas Flamel. Harry left the locker room alone sometime later to take his Nimbus 2000 back to the broom shed. He couldn't even remember feeling happier. He'd really done something to be proud of now. No one could say he was just a famous name anymore. The evening air had never smelled so sweet. He walked over the damp grass, reliving the last hour in his head, which was a happy blur. Gryffindors running to lift him onto their shoulders, Ron and Hermione in the distance, jumping up and down, Ron cheering through a heavy nosebleed. Harry had reached the shed. He leaned against a wooden door and looked up at Hogwarts with its windows glowing red in the setting sun. Gryffindor in the lead. He'd done it. He'd shown Snape. And speaking of Snape, a hooded figure came swiftly down the front steps of the castle, clearly not wanting to be seen. It walked as fast as possible towards the Forbidden Forest. Harry's victory faded from his mind as he watched. He recognized the figure's prowling walk. Snape, sneaking into the forest while everyone else was at dinner. What was going on? Harry jumped back on his Nimbus 2000 and took off. Gliding silently over the castle, he saw Snape enter the forest at a run. He followed. The trees were so thick he couldn't see where Snape had gone. He flew in circles, lower and lower, brushing the tops of branches until he heard voices. He glided down toward them and landed noiselessly in a towering beech tree. He climbed carefully along one of the branches, holding tight to his broomstick, trying to see through the leaves. Below, in a shadowy clearing, stood Snape, but he wasn't alone. Quirrell was there too. Harry couldn't make out the look on his face, but he was stuttering worse than ever. Harry strained to catch what they were saying. Don't know why you wanted to meet here, of all places, Severus. I thought we'd keep this private, said Snape, his voice icy. Students aren't supposed to know about the Sorcerer's Stone after all. Harry leaned forward. Quirrell was mumbling something. Snape interrupted him. Have you found out how to get past the Beast of Hagrid's yet? But Severus, You don't want me as your enemy, Quirrell, said Snape, taking a step toward him. I don't know what you... Well, you know perfectly well what I mean. An owl hooted loudly, and Harry nearly fell out of the tree. He steadied himself in time to hear Snape say, You're a little bit of hocus-pocus. I'm waiting. But I don't. Very well, Snape cut in. We'll have another little chat soon, when you've had time to think things over and decided where your loyalties lie. He threw his cloak over his head and strode out of the clearing. It was almost dark now, but Harry could see Quirrell standing quite as still, though he was petrified. Harry, where have you been? Hermione squeaked. We won! You won! We won! Shouted Ron, thumping Harry on the back, and it gave Malfoy a black eye, and Neville tried to take on Crabbe and Goyle single-handed. He's still out cold, but Madame Pomfrey says he'll be all right. Talk about showing Slytherin! Everyone's waiting for you in the common room. We're having a party! Fred and George stole some cakes and stuff from the kitchens. Never mind that now, said Harry breathlessly. Let's find an empty room. You wait till you hear this. He made sure Peeves wasn't inside before shutting the door behind them. Then he told them what he'd seen and heard. So we were right. It is the Sorcerer's Stone, and Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get it. He asked if he knew how to get past Fluffy, and then he said something about Quirrell's hocus-pocus. I reckon there are other things guarding the stone apart from Fluffy. Loads of enchantments, probably. And Quirrell would have done some anti-dark art spells that Snape needs to break through. So you mean the stone's only safe as long as Quirrell stands up to Snape? Said Hermione in alarm. It'll be gone by next Tuesday, said Ron. Chapter 14, Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. Quirrell, however, must have been braver than they thought. In the weeks that followed, he did seem to be getting paler and thinner, but it didn't look as though he'd cracked yet. Every time they passed the third-floor corridor, Harry and Ron and Hermione would press their ears to the door to check that Fluffy was still growling inside. Snape was sweeping about in his usual bad temper, which surely meant that the stone was still safe. Whenever Harry passed Quirrell these days, he gave him an encouraging sort of smile, and Ron had started telling people off for laughing at Quirrell's stutter. Hermione, however, had more on her mind than the Sorcerer's Stone. She had started drawing up study schedules and color-coding all her notes. Harry and Ron wouldn't have minded, but she kept nagging them to do the same. Hermione, exams are ages away. 10 weeks, Hermione snapped. That's not ages, that's like a second to Nicholas Flamel. But we're not 600 years old, Ron reminded her. Anyway, what are you studying for? You already know it all. What am I studying for? Are you crazy? You realize we need to pass these exams to get into the second year. They're very important. I should have started studying a month ago. I don't know what's gotten into me. Unfortunately, the teacher seemed to be thinking along the same lines as Hermione. They piled so much homework on them that the Easter holidays weren't nearly as much fun as the Christmas ones. It was hard to relax with Hermione next to you reciting the 12 uses of dragon's blood or practicing wand movement. Moaning and yawning, Harry and Ron spent most of their free time in the library with her, trying to get through all their extra work. I'll never remember this, Ron burst out one afternoon, throwing down his quill and looking longingly out of the library window. It was the first really fine day they'd had in months. The sky was a clear, forget-me-not blue, and there was a feeling in the air of summer coming. Harry, who was looking up at the Ditney, 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, didn't look up until he heard Ron say, "Hagrid, what are you doing in the library?" Hagrid shuffled into view, hiding something behind his back. He looked very out of place in his moleskin overcoat. "Just looking," he said in a shifty voice that got their interest at once. "And, what are you lot up to?" He suddenly looked suspicious. "You're not still looking for Nicholas Flamel, are you?" "Oh, we found out who he was ages ago," said Ron impressively. "And we know that the dog's guarding a sorcerer's stone." Shh. Hagrid looked around quickly to see if anyone was listening. "Don't go shouting about it. What's the matter with you?" "There are a few things we want to ask you, as a matter of fact," said Harry. "About what's guarding the stone apart from Fluffy." "Shh," said Hagrid again. "Listen. Come to see me later. I'm not promising I'll tell you anything. Mind, I don't go rabbiting about it in here. Students aren't supposed to know. They'll think I've told you." "We'll see you later then," said Harry. Hagrid shuffled off. "What was he hiding behind his back?" said Hermione thoughtfully. "Do you think it had anything to do with the stone?" "I'm going to see what section he was in," said Ron, who'd had enough of working. He came back a minute later with a pile of books in his arms and slammed them down on the table. "Dragons!" he whispered. Hagrid was looking up stuff about dragons. "Look at these. Dragon species of Great Britain and Ireland, from Egg to Inferno, a Dragon Keeper's Guide." "Hagrid's always wanted a dragon. He told me the first time I ever met him," said Harry. "But it's against our laws," said Ron. "Dragon breeding was outlawed by the Warlocks' Convention of 1709, and everyone knows that. It's hard to stop muggles from noticing us if we're keeping dragons in the back garden. Anyway, you can't tame dragons. It's dangerous. You should see the burns Charlie's got off wild ones in Romania." But there aren't wild dragons in Britain," said Harry. "Of course there are," said Ron. "Common Welsh Green and the Hebridean Blacks. The Ministry of Magic has a job hushing them all up, I can tell you. But our kind have to keep putting spells on muggles who spotted them to make them forget." "So what on earth is Hagrid up to?" said Hermione. When they knocked on the door of the gamekeeper's hut an hour later, they were surprised to see that all the curtains were closed. Hagrid called, "Who is it?" before he let them in, and then shut the door quickly behind him. It was stifling hot inside. Even though it was such a warm day, there was a blazing fire in the grate. Hagrid made them tea and offered them stoat sandwiches, which they refused. "So, you wanted to ask me something?" "Yes," said Harry, but there was no point in beating around the bush. "We were wondering if you could tell us what's guarding around the Sorcerer's Stone apart from Fluffy." Hagrid frowned at him. "Of course I can't," he said. "Number one, I don't know myself. Number two, you know too much already, and I wouldn't tell you if I could. That stone's here for a good reason. It was almost stolen out of Gringotts. I suppose you've worked that out and all. Beats me how you even know about Fluffy. Oh, come on, Hagrid. You might not want to tell us, but you do know. You know everything that goes on around here," said Hermione in a warm, flattering voice. Hagrid's beard twitched, and they could tell he was smiling. "We only wondered who had done the guarding, really. We wondered who Dumbledore had trusted enough to help him apart from you." Hagrid's chest swelled at these last words. Harry and Ron beamed at Hermione. "Well, I don't suppose it hurt to tell you that, let's see, he borrowed Fluffy from me, and then, some of the teachers did enchantments. Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall," he ticked them off in his fingers, "Professor Quirrell, and Dumbledore himself did something, of course. Hang on, I've forgotten someone. Oh, yeah, Professor Snape." "Snape?" "Yeah, you're not still on about that, are you? Look, Snape helped protect the stone. He's not about to steal it." Harry knew that Ron and Hermione were thinking the same thing he was. If Snape had been on in protecting the stone, he must have been easy to find out how the other teachers had guarded it. He probably knew everything, except, it seems, Quirrell's spell, and how to get past Fluffy. "Not a soul knows except me and Dumbledore," said proudly. "Well, that's something." "Oh, I'm sorry. You're the only one who knows how to get past Fluffy, are you, Hagrid?" Asked Harry anxiously. "And you wouldn't tell anyone, would you? Not even one of the teachers?" "Not a soul knows except me and Dumbledore," said Hagrid loudly. "Well, that's something," Harry muttered to the others. "Hagrid, can we have the window open? I'm boiling." "Can't, Harry, sorry," said Hagrid. Harry noticed and glanced at the fire. Harry looked at it too. "Hagrid, what is that?" But he already knew what it was. It was at the very heart of the fire. Underneath the kettle, it was a huge black egg. Ah, said Hagrid, feeling nervous with his beard. That's er, Where did you get it, Hagrid? Said Ron, crouching over the fire to get a closer look at the egg. It must have cost you a fortune. Won it, said Hagrid. Last night I was down in the village having a few drinks, and I got into a game of cards with a stranger. I think he was quite glad to get rid of it, to be honest. But what are you going to do with it when it's hatched? Said Hermione. Well, I've been doing some reading, said Hagrid, pulling out a large book from under his pillow. Got this out of the library. Dragon breeding for pleasure and profit. It's a bit out of date, of course, but it's all in here. Keep the egg in the fire, 'cause their mothers breathe fire in 'em, see? And when it hatches, feed it a bucket of brandy mixed with chicken blood every half hour. And see here, how to recognize different eggs. What I got there's a Norwegian ridgeback. They're rare, them. He looked very pleased with himself, but Hermione didn't. Hagrid, you live in a wooden house. But Hagrid wasn't listening. He was humming merrily as he stoked the fire.